I was just telling you this earlier, but the first time that I've been in a public spot without Secret Service in the room is right now. So I'm like looking around for these guys because I'm used to just having them. It's 3 months, right? So he asked me the Monday of the RNC convention, which I think was June 15th. And I really didn't know that morning. I thought that he was probably going to pick me, but I didn't know for sure. Probably 60-40, basically. And so I had no idea. I get the call around 1 o'clock at Milwaukee time at the RNC convention. I'm hanging out with my kid. Another one of my kids is in the other room asleep because, our kids are young, so they nap still. And he makes this call, and he's like, hey, do you want to be my vice president? I was like, oh.
Was it literally just like that?
Well, actually, what happened is I get a text message from a staff member on his team that says, you just missed a very important phone call. And I don't know, because there's so much inbound traffic that I think it just went straight to voicemail. So I call him back and I'm like, hey, sir, what's going on? He said, JD, you just missed a very important phone call. I'm going to have to pick somebody else now. So I'm about to shit a brick here. And then he says, no, I'm just kidding. Obviously, I want you to be my vice president. And the funny thing is, my 7-year-old is in the background and he has no idea what's going on. And I love that, right? It's one of the good things about this. He has no clue what's going on. He's like, Dad, who are you talking to? He's talking about Pokemon cards, right? And Trump hears my son in the background and he says, well, who's that? And I said, that's my 7-year-old son, you. And he's like, put him on the phone. And I'm just anxious for him to get this statement out because in my mind it's not final until the statement is actually out. And he talks to my son and he reads the statement that he is going to put out on Truth Social announcing that I'm the VP nominee of the Republican Party. And he's like, what do you think about that, Ewan? And my son Ewan's like, oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And then he gives the phone back to me. He's like, I have no idea what the hell's going on.
He doesn't even know what that means.
Yeah, he has no idea. And of course, I remember this story because in particular, and the Madison Square Garden rally of a few days ago was the first time that my son actually met Donald Trump. So he'd spoken to him on the phone, but hadn't actually met him until the rally at MSG. And my 7-year-old really wanted to tell him a joke, and he remembers this phone conversation. And so he tells him this joke, and Trump kind of chuckles, but also is probably judging me because it was a somewhat inappropriate joke for a 7-year-old to tell. But here we are.
Well, that's the only ones 7-year-olds remember.
That's right. Well, it's like, I have terrible language, and it's one of my many flaws, but I was raised by my very working class grandmother, and she was actually very interestingly, she was a very devout Christian, but she also had, a language that would make a sailor blush. And so I talk like that because I was raised by this woman.
Those are fun ladies.
Those are fun ladies, man. She was she was awesome. She was an amazing person, a huge personality, right? We called her a force of nature because she was such this big personality. But my wife's rule is, basically he's only allowed to cuss when he's telling this one joke. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah, so he told this joke to Donald Trump. Yeah, exactly. He says it 14 times a day.
Yeah, early on, I told my kids, you can swear in front of us. I go, but don't swear in front of other parents.
Right.
And don't swear for no reason.
Right. Well, because they judge you, right? The other parents judge you. How old are your kids?
Well, the youngest ones are 14 and 16, and I have a 28-year-old. Okay. But when my 14-year-old was 2, we were on a skiing trip, and we were about to leave. We packed up all our stuff, but her helmet, we forgot to put her helmet away. I go, oh, we forgot to put the helmet away. And she just looks down at the helmet and she goes, shit. And my wife is just like, oh my God. Right. It was so funny. There's just something adorable about a 2-year-old that doesn't know that you're not supposed to say shit.
No,
and just
absolutely,
that cute little face.
Well, I mean, my 4-year-old, he was 3 at the time. We were going, because, we live in Cincinnati, but then I'm a senator, so we spent a lot of time in Washington, and I was taking my 4-year-old solo, he was 3 at the time, on this trip, and we're on a Delta flight, we're in the back, I'm kind of wondering, because, I've got bedhead, and I'm thinking to myself, do any of these people know that I'm a senator, because I look like shit right now, and my sort of get away with it, I don't think that anybody notices who I am, and we're sitting there, and my son drops one of those Biscoff cookies in between the seat, and he looks at me and he says, Dad, well, fuck. And like 12 people instantly turn around and look at me. And it's like, oh, Senator Vance, your son has such colorful language. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm such a terrible father. And these people are all judging me.
Yeah.
But it's, but you're right. It's so cute.
It's adorable.
It's so funny. But yeah, I got to do a little bit better about that because they're going to start judging me.
People need to relax.
They
little
do.
bad words
really
every now and then. It's good for you. I think it's good for you. I think it gets a little steam out.
I agree. It's good.
Was there any part of you that was like, do I really want this job? Because it comes with so much. It comes with not having the Secret Service in the room. It comes with this enormous change of your life, this insane...
It really is amazing. I mean, one of the first times that I sort of spent like a large amount of time with Trump was in 2021, and I was thinking about running for the Senate, so I was down to Mar-a-Lago talking to him, and my initial reaction on seeing him was like, oh my God, you look really good. You actually look healthier now than you did 6 years ago. Normally presidents age very, very badly. I mean, look, I definitely thought, okay, obviously this is a big thing, right? And I talked about it with my wife a lot because she's like she was a working corporate litigator. She's got a very big career. She's much smarter than I am. And it was a marital conversation, in some ways a tough one because, even though, I'm a senator, we're still pretty anonymous. Right, like we can go on vacation, or we were till this happened. We go on vacation. Yeah, you'd have people stop and ask to take a photo or say something nice. But most people, if you went somewhere, didn't know who you were. Right now, it's literally impossible for us to go anywhere.
What's that shift feel like? Like you're 40 years old, right? So
yeah, I mean,
like this, just off a cliff, complete different life.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's been. I mean, look, in some ways, it's really nice because people come up and say really nice things to you. They tell you they're praying for your kids, they're praying for your family.
But it's also very weird, though, doesn't it? Like if you go through Brooklyn.
Sure, no, of course, yeah.
Through the super woke, blue-haired parts of Brooklyn.
It's interesting. When we were in New York for the MSG rally, a few people saw me and flashed the universal New York sign for "We're number one," right? So they like us even in New York City. But it's definitely weird to just not be anonymous at all anymore, right? And that's taken some getting used to. I think part of it is also, let me just give you an example. So Sunday morning, we want to go for, this is the event in Madison Square Garden. We had the morning where I didn't really have anything going on. I had a couple phone calls. So we want to go for a walk with the kids in Central Park. And normally you would walk out of your hotel and walk into Central Park and hang out with your family. Now it requires, we have to notify Secret Service. And so then they have to scope out an area where they can make sure that it's going to be properly safe. And so instead of walking out our hotel room and taking a walk in Central Park, we hop in a car and show up in some random part of Central Park that's 20 blocks away. And then, of course, as soon as we get out, everybody's like, well, who the hell is this? Because there are 14-car motorcade there. So the lack of anonymity is definitely an annoyance that comes along with it. But I'm the kind of person where you just take the good with the bad. There are a lot of benefits to it. There are some downsides to it. It's what I asked for. I try not to think too much about it or complain too much about it. I just try to accept it. I think obviously if we win, which 6 days from now, I think we are going to win, I think we'll have to sort of get into more of a routine with it. My attitude thus far has been, well, it's only for a few months, so you can do anything for a few months.
Is the adjustment, is it difficult? Was it pretty easy? Did you just accept it? Like, this is how life is now?
Well, you have to accept it, but it's not easy, right? I mean, in particular for our kids, right? Like, okay, I really like to drive, and 99% of the time that if we're in the car as a family, I'm driving, my wife's in the passenger seat just because I like to drive. And I think for our kids, getting used to, we're not going into our car, we're going into this black SUV, and Daddy's not driving.
Right, there's some other person there that don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, like one of the first things that happened, we're back at our house in Cincinnati the weekend after the RNC convention, and we're sitting there watching like some stupid show, Emily in Paris on Netflix or something, which, sorry, I don't mean to call it a stupid show. I actually think Emily in Paris is a masterpiece, but set that to the side, bracket that one for now. But we're watching some show on Netflix, and, you see one guy walk past your window, and then you see another guy walk past your window, and it's just a Secret Service agent patrolling, just little things like that. So, you recognize that your zone of privacy is very narrow, and that takes some adjusting and getting used to. And, there are all of these small little adjustments, but by and large, honestly, like I love our Secret Service detail. Our kids are really into them. They sort of see them as their police protectors. Our 7-year-old, it's funny, he's in second grade, and one of his buddies, their parents came to us and said, "Do you know that the kids are playing this game in school called Boss Man, where basically one second grader will walk down the hallway or down the playground flanked by two separate second graders."
Like they're playing Secret Service now?
Secret Service now in their school.
Bizarre.
So, like, on the one hand, that's really bizarre, and I hope that it doesn't permanently screw up the psychological development of my kid. On the other hand, it's kind of funny, and you just go with the flow and you try to work with it.
Yeah. I guess they're just making fun with it.
Yeah.
Did you have presidential aspirations before all this? Is this something that you had considered about the future? Was it like how did you approach this?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things when you're elected to the Senate, and I'm a pretty young guy. I think I'm the second youngest United States senator right now. You certainly think, like, is this something I might do in the future? What does this look like? What would you need to do in terms of getting your family in the right mental space and just making it happen? But it's all very abstract, right? It's not all that different from, 10 years ago thinking about starting a business that I never started, right? It's just things you think about, but you never really think that hard about, right? And that was kind of my attitude towards it. I started to realize that Trump was thinking pretty seriously about making me his VP nominee probably earlier this year, because he would ask me a lot about who I thought the VP nominee should be.
Oh boy.
And I'd give him, yeah, exactly. And I'd give him names of people that I thought would be pretty good at it. And a lot of the names that I gave him, he would criticize, and I almost felt like he was inviting me to throw myself out there. But it's funny. The morning that he was shot in Butler, PA, was the first time that he and I ever talked about it. So that was a Saturday. Just thinking about it, I guess it was probably June 13th, because I think the convention started June 15th. I go down to Mar-a-Lago that morning, Saturday morning, and I'm talking to him for the first time, because the media would ask me. I was like one of the rumored shortlist candidates. I kept on getting these questions from reporters. Have you ever had this conversation with Trump? And the honest answer was no. Well, Saturday morning that changed, because I go down there and he's like, what do you think? Why should I choose you? Why should I not choose these other guys? Like, we just had a conversation.
Who else was in the running?
I don't really know, actually.
Don't lie.
I really don't know.
Come on, man.
I think that there were a couple of senators that were being considered, a couple of governors, a couple of former cabinet secretaries, but you don't really know, because when Donald Trump sat me down, he talked about 10 different people that he was thinking about naming, and this was 2 days before he made the selection.
So he's playing like a little, let's see how JD thinks game.
Yeah, I think so. And, he told me that he was talking to the gardener at Mar-a-Lago about who the vice presidential nominee should be. And that's one of, I think, Trump's sort of political geniuses, is he talks to everybody about everything. And I was like, well, what did the gardener at Mar-a-Lago have to say about this conversation? Because this really directly impacts my life. And, one of his staff members who's in the room, he's like, actually, wouldn't it really set the world ablaze if we just made the decision today? And so why don't you come up with me and we'll just do the announcement in Butler, Pennsylvania? Whoa. And I said, and of course, not knowing at the time what was going to happen, I was like, absolutely, let's get this over with, because I'm sick of not knowing. Let's just get this thing over with. And then he's like, no, I'm not gonna do it up there. We need to prepare for it better. So look, I'm not saying it's gonna be you, but I'm thinking very seriously about it. Have fun. We'll see you after Butler, PA. And then of course I go back home to Ohio.
Oh boy.
He gets shot. The initial reaction is I actually thought they had killed him, because when you first see the video, he grabs his ear and then he goes down. And I'm like, oh my God, they just killed him. And I was first I was so pissed, but then I go into like fight or flight mode with my kids. I'm like, all right, kids, we were at a mini golf place in Cincinnati, Ohio. I grab my kids up, throw them in the car, go home and load all my guns, and basically stand like a sentry at our front door.
Holy shit.
And that was sort of my reaction to it. Anyway, I really didn't know it was going to happen until Monday morning. I didn't know who else was being selected. I think it was all the names that people sort of see out there, right? All good guys, like nobody I have any personal animosity towards. But obviously, here we are.
How much did you study the story of the attempted assassin? How much have you paid attention to it?
You know what, Crooks or Cooks or whatever the guy's name is in Pennsylvania? I've read a fair amount about it, and it's pretty bizarre.
It's very bizarre.
It's bizarre. They haven't been able to get into his phone.
They got into his phone. Didn't they?
Have they? I thought they've...
I thought they said they did. Maybe you know better than me.
Well, maybe they got into his phone, but they couldn't access his encrypted messages or something. I thought there was some deal where they haven't really gotten his communication yet.
Yeah, it's
I maybe haven't read it as closely as you have, so don't take that as gospel truth.
You have access to more information, but maybe you can't talk about it.
No, trust me. There's nothing about this that I have access to information I can't talk about.
Well, there was a lot of weird stuff to it. One of them is that his where he lived was professionally scrubbed. So he got there was no silverware. There's no silverware.
That's
the place
bizarre.
Is scrubbed.
Right?
Yeah, there's nothing. There's no DNA, no hard drives, no nothing.
Well, so and how do you get that close? I mean, do you shoot guns?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a pretty good shot. I served in the Marine Corps for 4 years. An AR-15 from 140 yards away is a
chip
pot shot.
Even without a scope. He didn't have a scope, right?
I don't believe he had a scope.
But even without a scope.
Without a scope. I mean, I've shot an M16 many times and an AR-15 without a scope. There is no... It is shocking that he's alive.
Yeah.
Right? It really is. I mean, I'm a person of faith, but I think it's a genuine miracle that guy didn't kill him. But how did he get so close? There's a lot of really big questions.
Well, he was walking around the area with a rangefinder before the event,
and people were yelling and saying, "This guy's got a gun. He's on the roof."
Yeah.
There was that crazy. I think it was a BBC reporter, somebody with an English accent, who did the report on the ground with the guy. He's like got a MAGA hat on and a Bud Light. He's probably not a Bud Light. He's got some beer and he's talking to this guy who saw crooks get on the roof, and he's yelling at him. It's an amazing clip. He's yelling at him like, "Hey," he's yelling at police officers saying, "Hey, this guy's on the roof. Go and get him." And nobody responded to it. And the whole thing is very fishy to me. And I hope that we win and then get to the bottom of it, because I think somebody clearly screwed up.
It doesn't seem like just screwed up. Like the excuse that the lady from the Secret Service had, that they couldn't put snipers on the roof because the roof was sloped. Like, all of it is bananas.
No, that's
story.
ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
And the miracle is Trump turns his head at the last second.
That's right.
The very last second, he turns his head to look at the chart, and the bullet just grazes his ear.
That's right.
There's this stupid conspiracy out there. He's got a mark on his ear. I saw it. He has a mark on his ear, and people are like, "Why isn't there a hole in his ear?" Because it's just the edge of the skin got hit.
That's right.
all it was.
That's right.
It's the luckiest of luckiest shots ever for him. Unfortunately, not for the people that are behind him, because a couple of people got shot. And for anybody that thinks that was staged, you don't understand shooting. There's no way you can graze someone's ear from 120 yards.
Absolutely
you can hit them center mass.
It's crazy.
You're not going to be able to graze their ear. You could kill them easily, accidentally, if you were faking something like that.
Well, we've all seen the graphics, right, of him turning his head, and if he hadn't turned his head, that it would have went right through his brain.
And there was another one that went to the left side of him, right?
That barely missed him. Yeah, that barely missed him.
And then instantly that guy's dead. And then they take a hold of his body. He's cremated 10 days later. There's no press conference. There's no toxicology report. No one talks about it on the news.
Right. And when there's a school shooter, we usually have the person's manifesto out there a day or two later.
Yeah.
We know nothing about the motive here, which I think is the craziest thing. Obviously he's motivated because he hates Donald Trump, but you don't know anything about the secondary motive. Man, it is weird. It is. The only
time we don't get a manifesto is when they're trans. When they're trans, they hide those manifestos.
The Nashville shooter, man, that was crazy.
Have you read any of it?
I've read some of it.
It's pretty wild.
It's pretty wild. Yeah. And I mean that.
And they decide that's bad for the cause.
That's
so
right.
They decided
they decided to suppress it. But no, the Nashville shooter. I mean, just while we're on the topic, went in and murdered a bunch of children at a Christian school because he or she, like whatever, was motivated by some very radical trans ideology.
Yes.
And that is something we should talk more about as a country.
100%. And they didn't want, if there's any other ideology that led someone to mass murder, you would examine that ideology very carefully. It was some sort of radical religion. People would be like very concerned about that radical religion.
That's right.
And it is. It's radical religion of woke.
That's exactly what it is.
It's this weird idea that you are so virtuous and so correct. You're allowed to commit violence against these other people because they're the oppressors, even though they're children.
Well, these signs that are in super woke neighborhoods? I'm sure there's plenty of them in Austin. Like, in this house, we believe science is real. No person is legal. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know your religious background, but like I'm a convert to Catholicism. It's like was raised Christian, became an atheist, came back to Christianity, got baptized Catholic like 5 or 6 years ago. And what is so interesting about this in this house we believe is it's so similar to the creed that you declare every day at a Catholic Mass, right? We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God. And there's almost a similar cadence between the Christian creed and what these guys are doing with this hyper woke stuff. And then there's the rallies. And then there's, of course, the various rituals. And it absolutely is a religious faith. There was this really interesting post that was, I forget exactly who wrote it, but the title was Gay Rights as, what was it? It was like gay rights as religious rights, but the second rights was RITES. And it was a guy who was like a pro-gay rights guy, but sort of made the observation that when you get into the really radical trans stuff, you actually start to notice the similarities between a practiced religious faith and what these guys are doing. Yeah. And it's very interesting. I mean, I actually met earlier with a friend who lives in Austin who's like a, kind of a gay Reagan Democrat. And he's a very, very interesting guy. He's a fascinating guy. He's one of the smartest political philosophers, I think.
How do you be a gay Reagan Democrat?
I don't know. It's just kind of...
what's a Reagan Democrat?
Like, I mean, he's basically like now what you would call a Trump Republican, but he's a political philosopher and he writes about economics, right? That's sort of how I got connected to him. I had no idea he was gay when I first met him, but I'll never forget, he sent me something like 6 or so years ago, and it was Elizabeth Warren when she was running for president, and she was like, "We stand for all non-binary two-spirit," and all of the like the LGBTI plus. Right. She was talking about all the plus, and she was codifying it. And he sent me this text message with this Elizabeth Warren tweet, and he's like, "I don't know what the hell two-spirit is. We just wanted to be left the hell alone." Yeah. And I think that, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if me and Trump won just the normal gay guy vote, because again, they just wanted to be left the hell alone. And now you have all this crazy stuff on top of it that they're like, well, no, we didn't want to give pharmaceutical products to 9-year-olds who are transitioning their genders. We just wanted to be left the hell alone.
Well, a lot of gay guys feel like the whole movement is homophobic, which is ironic because they think that there's people think there's something wrong with being gay, so what you really are is a girl.
Yes.
And they think that a lot of this is being given, these thoughts are being given to gay kids. These kids will just grow up to be gay men, and instead you're getting them to convert their gender.
It's pharmaceutical conversion therapy, right?
And it's profitable, which is terrifying. It's terrifying once pharmaceutical corporations have they have a pattern and a history of profiting off of things. They want to keep profiting off of it. They don't want to just stop. And so right now, this has become a profitable venture that's scaled. If you go look back from like 2007 to 2024, there's way more of these air quotes gender affirming care centers.
Yes,
and they're profitable.
Well, and this used to be something that the old left, right? The criticism that was made of American healthcare, which I always thought made some sense as a conservative guy, is that when you have the profit motive influencing government policy around healthcare, then sometimes the profit motive can be a good thing. Like, we're going to develop life-saving cancer drugs. We want that to happen, right? And I'm fine with people making a big profit for that. But then sometimes they'll try to manipulate government policy to make their own drugs more profitable, not because it's good for health, but because these people just naturally, like most people, want to make some money. Yeah. And that conversation has totally disappeared. Like, I got into a big argument, and this person, you can read about it in the New York Times, later disavowed our friendship and leaked our text messages to the New York Times. But the breaking point was I came out against this gender transition for minors when I was running for the Senate a few years ago. And she's a transgender individual, and she kind of flipped out on me. And the thing that I never understood, because she's like very much an old school leftist, is, are you not at all a little bit worried about how rich people are getting by prescribing experimental therapeutics to 9, 10, 12-year-old kids? Like, this used to be something that the American left would have gone crazy about. And now the only people who are raising concerns about it are conservative Republicans. But we should be concerned because it's not just like the lobbying and the influence. I mean, there's something called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's sort of the manual of psychiatric disorders. And I think that we're on the DSM-5, as it's called, which is the 5th edition of this manual. You have drug companies that are making money that are lobbying to have, child dysphoria put into our psychiatric manuals, because then psychiatrists will treat that condition, and then those pharmaceutical companies will get rich from it. Somebody should be interrogating whether the political incentives of our country actually align with the financial incentives of the pharmaceutical industry, because oftentimes the answer is going to be no, but nobody's asking that question.
Well, we've always known that children are very easily influenced, and that children shouldn't be allowed to make life-changing decisions when they're very young. That's why they can't get tattooed.
Absolutely.
We've always known that. And then all of a sudden, because of gender, that's abandoned.
That's right.
We've completely changed the way we think that children, they just know. I've had mind-numbing conversations with people who believe that. And it all falls apart if you just keep asking questions.
That's right.
Just ask them to define, how can you know this? What about the development of the frontal lobe? What about this understanding that children have never been able to make life-changing decisions?
Correct.
You don't allow them to drink alcohol. You don't allow them to get tattooed. They can't join the military when they're 10. Like, there's a lot of shit you can't do when you're a little kid.
Yeah.
Why are you letting them just change their gender? And what does this even mean?
That's right.
And then the New York Times thing that comes out, where it shows that they had a whole study about these puberty blockers that showed that they do not help the children's mental health, and that they probably have a lot of horrific side effects.
Exactly.
And so they decided not to release the study.
And they decided not to publish that, right?
Which
shows you the corruption of science, is that we're actually not publishing studies that suggest that gender transition craziness has reached the boiling point. I mean, you have kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Every single day, my 4-year-old or 2-year-old will come to me and say something that is batshit insane, because they're 4 and 2.
Yeah.
Like, my 4-year-old will come and say, "Daddy, I'm a dinosaur." Right? I'm going to take him to like the dinosaur transition clinic and put scales on him. And
the other thing is, like, if you were encouraging them, and some parents, it's just I'm just going to say it, even though it sounds gross, they want their kid to be a part of the LGBTQ thing, because it looks like a flag of virtue that they can post in their front lawn. Oh, look, we have a queer child. Like, oh, you're amazing. There's a weird thing about it with some of these nutty parents, where you could imagine them there has to be some reason why this enormous percentage of Hollywood kids are trans. Like, how many celebrities have trans kids? It's new. It's not a thing that was going on just it was rare in the past.
It becomes a social signifier for a lot of parents. And we have to be honest about that fact. And if you look at where the gender craziness is the most common, it's most common among upper middle class to lower middle class white progressives.
100%.
Now, you could believe, that there's just like something genetic going on in the mind of a wealthy white progressive, or you could believe that this is a cultural trend that we should be questioning a lot more than we are right now. And unfortunately, I mean, here's one thing that I really worry about is, think about the incentives. People are very good at rationalizing things. If you are a, middle class or upper middle class white parent, and the only thing that you care about is whether your child goes into Harvard or Yale, like, obviously that pathway has become a lot harder for a lot of upper middle class kids. But the one way that those people can participate in the DEI bureaucracy in this country is to be trans. And is there a dynamic that's going on where if you become trans, that is the way to reject your white privilege, right? That's the social signifier.
Yeah.
The only one that's available in the hyper woke mindset is if you become gender non-binary.
Non-binary is the best one because you don't even have to do anything. You can just say I could say I'm non-binary, and like you don't have to do anything, but all of a sudden you're a part of the group.
Yeah, well, that's right. And again, I think it's important to sort of, most people are not saying, oh, I'm white privileged, how do I become part of the privileged set? But it's these weird ways in which these ideas creep into the mind, to the mainstream.
Right.
And people are very good at rationalizing these things. And so what I think 20, 30 years ago, even among very well-to-do white progressives, like an 11-year-old says, 11-year-old boy says, I think that I'm a girl, most of the time we would have said, oh, that's ridiculous and crazy and, ha ha ha, and come back to me in a couple of days. Now I think there's this massive incentive to try to say, oh my God, does that mean that my kid is trans? And I also think it's, to your point, very warping on the minds of young kids, because what they're now doing is taking normal adolescent curiosity and normal adolescent discomfort. Like, I don't know a single person who went from the ages of 10 to 15 who didn't say, oh, like, sometimes I had some, weird ideas, or I dressed weird for a couple of years or something, right? It's a confusing phase for most Americans. We take that normal adolescent confusion and then we try to medicalize it, and nobody's saying, oh, when we do medicalize it, by the way, a lot of pharmaceutical companies get very rich off of it.
Not only very rich, but then the child is sterilized.
Yes.
I mean, this is for a lot of these kids, they'll never be able to have children ever again. If they change their mind, if they one day decide, oh, I was just going through a confusing time in my life, but now I've ruined my voice with hormones, my ovaries are destroyed, I had my testicles removed. Like, the whole thing is crazy.
So this is where I had the real breaking point with a friend that I mentioned earlier, is she made this argument that puberty blockers are fully reversible.
That's crazy.
And I'd actually never heard that. I mean, this is a few years ago. I'd never heard that argument before. And so I actually went and looked at it and looked at the data on this. The idea that if you give puberty delaying, puberty blockers, whatever you're going to call them, to kids who are 11, 12, 13, that's fully reversible, that is completely and preposterously insane. Now, even the most radical advocates of trans healthcare do not say that, right? Because look, I mean, you have sexual dysfunction, you have, to your point, hair in weird places that won't go away, you have voice changes that won't go away. We're experimenting on tens of thousands of American children. We're making them miserable. It's not having any long-term health benefit. It's making a lot of pharmaceutical companies rich. And it's conservative Republicans are the only ones saying, maybe this is a little crazy. Maybe we should stop.
Well, it just shows you how a lot of this, if you can call it a mind